Welcome back to HRE Insights in 30, the podcast that brings practical, real-world insights on compliance, fraud, and financial crime prevention to fintechs, banks, and high-risk financial businesses. I am your host, Justin Muscolino, CEO of High Risk Education, where, we train teams on AML, fraud, sanctions, crypto oversight, and a lot more. Definitely check it out. Now, for our special guest today, it's someone who sits at the intersection of fraud prevention, human trafficking intelligence, and victim advocacy. Freddy Massimi is an award-winning fraud fighter, certified financial crimes investigator, certified traffic investigator, national speaker, and financial crimes technologist at a financial institution. Now, he is also deeply involved with organizations like the Noble and Deliver Fund, where, he helps financial institutions detect scams, exploitation, and trafficking before victims fall through the cracks. You have quite the background, Freddie, and I'm really happy you're here today. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Justin. Glad to be here.
All right, so we're gonna go right into the questions for today. So, Freddie, your career spans frontline fraud work, financial crimes technology, and a whole lot more. So, what originally pulled you into this world? And, how did those early experiences shape the way you approach fraud and exploitation today?
So it's funny, I actually went to a small school here in Wilson, North Carolina called Barton College, and I wanted to be a biology major. And I always joked, and I saw the syllabus like the first week of school, and I was like, I don't know if this is going to be something I want to do. So there was something called Welcome Back Barton Day. And I saw this criminal justice table, and one of the signs says, criminal justice is more than law enforcement.
Hmm.
We partner with law enforcement. Law enforcement, I highly respect them. But when you can advocate and collaborate with law enforcement on the financial crime side, that's what really makes what these fraud programs are all about. And it's a huge differentiator.
Yeah, that blend of investigative training and human-centered focus is something we are missing a lot in fraud programs. And it's a
Yeah,
huge
absolutely.
differentiator, without a doubt. Now, looking at the human side of financial crime, you've said before, every transaction tells a story, and that, fraud isn't just about money, it's really about people. So, from your vantage point, what are the most misunderstood human impacts of scams, trafficking, and exploitation inside financial institutions?
One thing I'll always like to say is I always get with, well, human trafficking doesn't happen in our city. Well, I'll tell you this straight up. Yes, it does. It's happening at Target, it's happening at Walmart, it's happening at these places that you go to every day. And then you flip it to financial institutions and financial crimes. This is exactly why training teams to recognize behavioral and transactional red flags are not just rule based, they're critical. And let me go further on that, Justin. If
Sure.
you take a hotel and you take a airline, the activity looks normal. But if you pair those two with Sally Beauty Supply, Uber, ATM transactions between the hour of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And then you go even further to adding in where you're having Zelle transactions, which are faster payments, Cash App, Venmo, whatever it may be. And it's like $50 or $100. These pimps, these madams, and these Johns don't want their girls or boys that are being trafficked to even touch that money anymore. So they're really going into the full control of what they're making. And a lot of times, on average, these individuals are forced to perform 8 acts of sex trafficking or sexual interactions per night.
Wow.
And that's something I want this audience listening to this. That is just something that we need to advocate for, to do something about it. and speak for people that can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, that's incredible. I didn't even know that.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean the thing of it is, it's like if you don't train them, how do they know? You know, how do they know what to look for, what to identify, what to do? So, you know me, Freddie, I'm a proponent of training. Yeah, I want to skip into like the emerging scam typologies because, every year it feels like we're onto something new. And, when we
Hmm.
have scams like pig butchering, imposter fraud, and then, elder exploitation, this is crazy. I mean, this has really exploded in scale and sophistication. So, what emerging patterns or even like tactics should banks and fintechs be prepared for this year and just going forward?
Yep. So let me just talk about two typologies. One, sextortion. Sextortion is a hot topic, and in the audience listening, if you don't know what that is, it's a lot of times where, on average, you have a 12 to 17-year-old individual that is online. They get a message and they think it's from a good-looking female or a male. They exchange pictures, and I want you to read between the lines of what those pictures are of. And then they hit them with, if you don't pay me right now, I'm going to expose these pictures to your complete friend list. So it is crucial, parents listening to this, is make sure that you are monitoring your children's social media and putting it on private. There is no reason for it to be a public profile. Another one I want to talk about is that when you evolve those typologies, this is where that cross-functional training happens. You have AML and fraud. Everybody talks about free AML. Then you add in cyber and payments, and it has become so essential to training your people rather than optional. It is not optional anymore, and I want people to understand that. In order to tackle this, you have to make this training of all these typologies absolutely mandatory. It's critical.
Yeah, and it's not a one and done kind of thing. I mean, this is like, again, when we use
Correct.
the word emerging, this is continuous training now. You can't set it and forget it. It just doesn't work that way. Now, the thing that always gets me is the ages. When you mention the ages or I even hear the ages, it kind of just freaks me out knowing like I have girls too. So it is something for parents to really focus in on even more now. So I agree with you on that. Now, as far as like detection goes, there are a lot of institutions that still, miss. Now, you've done a lot of work with the ATII and the Noble on human trafficking intelligence. So, what are like the biggest gaps you see in how financial institutions detect trafficking related activity? And also, like, the how to, like what are the steps teams can do to improve themselves?
Yeah. So let me go into this. Is that what you just said is a perfect example of how operational teams, investigators, and leadership all need a shared understanding of what trafficking looks like in financial data. You know, I task a leader to sit with their individuals working the alerts to understand the why behind their clicking something and dispositioning something of client confirmed fraud. Okay, well, how do they confirm fraud? Was a client a victim of a pig butchering scam? Were they a victim of human trafficking where and people need to understand this, that if you talk about pig butchering scams, a lot of times those suspects that are scamming these victims, a lot of times they're in compounds
Hmm.
in Myanmar, in Asia, and all these other places. If it's Jamaica, it's Nigeria. One of my good fraud friends in the industry, Aaron West, definitely look into that Operation Shamrock, and she talks about where she was literally feet from these compounds, and these people are being held against their own will, and it's all about human trafficking. So again, being a leader in an organization, you really need to understand the why behind things, not just numbers. It's not the quantity of the quality. You have to look at the quality of the quantity. And you have to manage your team to really dig deep, but also understand that why they're doing things, because that is a success of a team in fraud.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The leadership component, right? Why you're doing it,
Yes.
think outside the box. Don't go purely by checklists, think a little bit. And I think leadership has a big place to play in this. Um, we talked about a little like what institutions still miss, but going after the fact, like the post-victimization support and like the roles of banks. You led the post-scam victimization working groups at the Noble. A lot of institutions, they do focus on prevention, but, far fewer focus on what happens after, someone becomes a victim. So, Freddie, like, what should banks be doing differently to support victims and also reduce repeat victimization, which is just nauseating. I'll pass it over to you.
I'm smiling because I had this question from somebody the other day is one, you need to pause. You need to pause and make sure that your policies are up to date and your trainings are up to date. And you also need to pause to make sure everybody is on the same path of what they're telling their victims. I remember being on the floor one day, sitting there and hearing an individual um, say, "Man, that person's so stupid. How can they fall for it?" Well, Freddie, the way he was, the way I am, I get up and I said, "Look," I said, "a lot of times these individuals don't know they're being scammed,
Mm,
and to hear that, you said that they're stupid, it's kind of alarming." I said, "Have you ever been trained of how to talk to a victim that's been a victim of a scam?" And they said, "No." I said, "Okay, well, let me just fill you in on a few things." A lot of times a client is where they're vulnerable. They're called a vulnerable adult for a reason. They lost their husband, they lost their wife, they
mm,
went on a dating website, they
yeah.
thought they met the love of their life. They're sending money to them, if it's cryptocurrency, if it's wires, if it's checks, to an individual. And then we realize on the banking side that this person is a mule. And what a mule is, if you're not understanding, um, what that is, it's a middleman. It's a person that is sending funds on behalf of someone else to another person. And that mule is definitely somebody that sometimes is caught on the hook for these funds because we'll give them a warning, Justin, and saying, hey, you're a victim of a scam right now, but you need to realize that this person you're sending funds to is 9 times out of 10 not the person that you think they are. And then 9 times out of 10, they pause and say, well, who are they? Well, we dig a little deeper. And I tell people all the time, dig deeper, go into their online banking and see where those IP addresses have been logging. Because a lot of times, Justin, they'll give these individuals access to their online banking. And they'll hear the stories of, hey, I just sent this money to you. Go ahead and look in your account. But what they don't realize is that person just transferred money from their home equity line of credit or another line of credit to their DDA. It's like, oh, I got all this money now. Well, and then they give them the story. Hey, I sent you $8,000 instead of $800. I need you to take the remaining money and send it back to me, but I can't have an account right now. It's going to be my supervisor in the army. And
Mm,
it's the same story over and over. And when I tell people is that post scam victimization working group that, we ran at the Noble, we had multiple institutions on there. It was great. We did breakout sessions every week. And now it's a 56-page document.
wow.
And if you haven't done so already, it is a free resource. If you go to thenoble.com, click the button join the fight, um, you will see this. You'll be vetted just to make sure we're not giving this, document to fraudsters. And we are all on the same page. How to talk to a victim, what to tell them. If there's a situation, this is how you need to handle it. And it's an absolute amazing document that, I will back because one, being a program manager of it, it opened my eyes and I got to meet so many amazing fraud fighters in the community. And it goes back to just strengthening the community trust.
Yeah. I mean, what you said kind of hit home, people, it's the emotional effect, right?
Yes,
People are in predicaments at certain times of their life where they're more vulnerable than others. And for anyone to demean a victim because of, those circumstances, to me, it's like, oh, I don't even know what to say. I'm speechless.
yeah,
So
it's
Freddie,
tough.
yeah, it is. It's nuts. So while we have you here, I'm gonna pick on your advice a little bit more, but this time it's for smaller banks and fintechs because not every institution has a large fraud or AML team. The smaller banks and even the emerging fintechs, what are like the most impactful, realistic steps that they can take to strengthen fraud detection and, trafficking awareness without even having a lot of money to spend?
Absolutely. It's simple. What I do with the Noble and what I do also with Deliver Fund. Um, and what I mean by that is it aligns perfectly what we teach. Simple, repeatable controls often outperform expensive tools when teams know what to look for. That's it. If they know what to look for, they're golden. If they don't know what to look for, it is a leader's responsibility to make sure that they are training and teaching these individuals. Because the one thing you don't want is that these trafficking indicators are right in front of them and they miss it.
Yeah, that's crazy. Freddie, I know we covered a lot here and, it's been quite powerful. I mean, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights because, fraud, scams, trafficking, these are big topics and they affect real people. And, your work reminds us all of that financial crime prevention is really ultimately about protecting lives and not just like ledgers. So,
Yes.
huge thank you to you, Freddie, for being with us on HRE Insights in 30. Pleasure to have you aboard.
Thank you.
And
Glad to
to
be here.
our, thank you so much. And to our listeners, this is why we do this show, short, relevant conversations with people solving real risk challenges today, like Freddie. So, thanks for tuning in. Stay curious, keep learning, and take care of yourself.